Again, happy Labor Day. Tomorrow is the 122nd official Labor Day, so this sermon, as you can tell, the service is about work and labor, both what it means to us and its spiritual aspects, but also how we can get too much of it. And as I stand here at the podium, I want to make a point about this podium. Andrew made this podium. And it's really unfair that the two of you have so much talent between you. And I looked on Andrew's website when I saw they made the podium, and he's just a fantastic artist and furniture maker. And this podium replaced a podium that is now repurposed in the back of it's not in the back of the sanctuary, it's outside, it's got the name tags on it. And Jay Miller, who's here, repurposed that podium with some excellent handiwork. That podium was made by former member of our congregation, Todd Hegland. That was before it was repurposed. So back when you look at the name tags, you can see the artwork of the podium that Todd made. And Todd was a member of VUU for many years. A lot of you I know will remember Todd and his wife Holly. Todd and Holly were a couple like that Robert Frost poem, The Master Speed, together wing to wing and oar to oar. And Holly passed away before Todd did, and they were already retired. So after Holly passed away, Todd needed something to do, so he built ramps. To make this stage area more accessible, he built ramps, and he did the work on the podium. He also conceived and planned and helped build our memorial garden. And eventually diabetes caught up with Todd, and he lost a leg, and then he declined more and more and was nearing the end. And I was here at VUU one evening. I don't know, it was probably for a board meeting or maybe a finance team meeting. A bunch of us were in that room over at the office where the copier is, and you can get your paper and your stapler and everything. And Kelly came in, and Kelly, you might remember this. You came into the offices, and we asked you what you'd been doing, and you said that you'd seen Todd that day. And well, Kelly told me that she'd been doing music ministry, Voices Lifted, and she had been visiting Todd and singing to him. And when she got there, Todd asked her how she was, and Kelly said, fine. But she paused like so many of us do when we're asked that question, how are you? And Kelly said, after she paused, she said, busy. I've been busy. And Kelly told us all this as we were in the office room, and she said, Todd looked at her and said, busy is good. It is good to be busy. And for me, these were Todd's last words. He probably said more because he lived longer than that. But those are the last words that were actually conveyed to me. So I remember them as his last words. And obviously those words, in that conversation, have stuck with me for these several years now. It is good to be busy. So back to Labor Day. It was first recognized in 1894. And I want you to think about the political climate today, in 2016. The culture. Would it really be possible today to recognize the value of workers, of laborers? In so many ways, we've made so much progress since 1894, but when it comes to recognizing the collective contribution of all of America's labor, our age may be less progressive today than it was in 1894. Labor Day began as a mass protest. 10 years before Labor Day, it began as a mass protest of 10,000 workers who walked off their job for a day in New York City to protest working conditions, and it was organized by a carpenter and a machinist who were members of the Socialist Labor Party. Labor Day ended up being a compromise. In political terms, you would call it a co-option. It was a holiday designed to funnel the revolutionary impulses of the late 1800s into a formal celebration sanctioned by the federal government. You see, in 1889, the International Socialist Congress had named May 1st, May Day, an International Workers' Day to commemorate the Haymarket riots that occurred in Chicago in 1886. From 1886 to 1894 was a decade of civil unrest. The specter of communism that Marx said haunted Europe, Karl Marx said haunted Europe, had started haunting the United States by that time. On May Day, 1894, riots broke out in Cleveland. Later that year, a labor strike that began at the Pullman Railcar Company spread to a national railway strike that began that threatened to shut down the country's rail system. And then President Grover Cleveland ended the strike by sending federal troops to Chicago. There was violence and unrest, and the urban areas of the country seemed to be possibly succumbing to a workers' revolution. Within weeks after the Pullman strike had been put down, President Cleveland offered a bill to Congress, and Congress passed a bill making September 1st, the first Monday in September, the national holiday. And he chose that day instead of May Day because President Cleveland did not want the holiday to align with the international workers' holiday. But regardless, when you're hopefully enjoying a picnic or some time with friends tomorrow or just spending time alone and relaxing, remember that you have Grover Cleveland and two socialists to thank for your day off. It's good to be busy. That is true, right? It is good to be busy. Some people say that Karl Marx devalued labor, this theory that Marx says that people who don't work are entitled just as much as people who do work. So Marx says people say that Marx doesn't value labor is untrue. In 1844, in his book Estranged Labor, Marx wrote this about labor. And I'm going to use gendered language because it flows better with Marx's works, but I hope you'll imagine that we're discussing all of us. In creating a world of objects by his personal activity in his work, man proves himself a conscious being. Man duplicates himself intellectually, but also actively in reality, and therefore he sees himself in a world that he has created. So Karl Marx believed that labor was a fundamental aspect of what makes us human. It is what makes us human. And I think it is true that labor is central to our humanity. Take that non-anthropocentric, queered reading of Genesis. The first act of creation was work. The prime mover that moved the Creator was a desire to create. The desire to create something out of nothing is the Big Bang. It's the thing that pre-exists existence, and that is the innate drive to do and to make. Pope John Paul II made this point in his 1981 encyclical Laborem Exercens. He wrote that human work is the key to making life more humane, and equated work with that initial mythical act of creation. The knowledge that by means of work humankind shares in the work of creation constitutes the most profound motive for undertaking. Our Reverend James Ford, our past Reverend who left us in 2000 to move to Providence, Rhode Island, had a sermon in 2009 in his Providence congregation called To Be of Use, Finding the Heart of Work. And Reverend Ford said this: the point of connection between each of us is work. When we see it, when we act from the perspective of hearing the need and just giving, then work becomes holy. Sitting with an old friend, changing a bedpan or a bandage, digging a ditch, running accounting numbers, organizing a food pantry. The holy is found when our hearts are open. The cry of the ancient need to be of use turns each toward action towards grace, transmutation, gold reaching out to gold. So in our faith, work has a central importance. In the Protestant work ethic and the spirit of capitalism, the German sociologist Max Weber wrote, the Puritan wanted to work in a calling. But in the modern age, here's the quote, one's calling prowls about in our lives like the ghost of dead religious beliefs. The Protestant ethic revered the idea that moral obligation is equal to filling one's duty in worldly affairs. Weber thought that modernity, the modern age, had used the idea of a calling to build what he famously called the iron cage of modern capitalism. In the United States, Weber wrote, the pursuit of wealth had been stripped of its religious and ethical meaning. For many of us, though, a Puritan-like, not Puritan necessarily, but a Puritan-like form of a calling remains as it was in pre-modernity, a moral duty that demands action. It's still seen in the missionary work of many faiths across the world, in our own faiths standing on the side of love activities, and in our own congregation's brave and essential alliance with the Black Lives Matter movement. By the way, our sign's been taken down again. But we'll put it back up, because that's what we do. Here's a mouthful, but this is what he said at the Democratic National Convention. Conservative, liberal, evangelical biblicist, Reverend William Barber, called for a moral revolution of values, for people of faith to be the moral defibrillator of our time. It is work and labor imbued with faith, and faith from all corners and all kinds, that is behind the creation of a more perfect world. Work has also been a liberating force for women in Western societies. In the 1972 interview, Simone de Beauvoir, the feminist existentialist, wrote, "What really counts if one wants to be truly independent is work, a job. Work is the first condition for women's independence." Gloria Steinem in 1984, in answering the question why should women enter the marketplace of labor, Steinem refuted the "we work because we have to" hypothesis. It was her book, Outrageous Acts and Everyday Rebellion. The chapter was The Importance of Work, where she said, a job is a human right. It is a principle that applies to men as well as to women. This revolution, women moving into the workforce in the Western world since the 1970s, is a revolution that has been transforming, and it is a revolution that has transformed the Western world. And we can also understand that a leader who supports a foreign policy with the belief that women's rights are human rights and human rights are women's rights is one who can help give women around the world the liberating benefit of work. Listen to this story by modern philosopher and public intellectual Martha Nussbaum. Consider Vasanti, a small woman in her early 30s who lives in Ahmedabad, a large city in the state of Gujarat in northwestern India. Vasanti's husband was a gambler and an alcoholic. He used the household money to get drunk. When that money was gone, he got a vasectomy to take advantage of the cash incentive that Gujarat's government offered to encourage sterilization. So Vasanti had no children, a huge liability given that a childless woman is more vulnerable to domestic violence. Eventually, as her husband became more and more abusive, she left him and returned to her own family. Many women in Vasanti's position end up in the street with no alternative but sex work. But it was her good fortune that her family was willing to help her. Vasanti's father, who used to make Singer sewing machine parts, had died, but her brothers were running an auto parts business in what was once his shop. Using one of his old machines and living in the shop, Vasanti earned a small income making eye holes for the hooks on sari tops. Meanwhile, her brothers gave her a loan to get another machine. Vasanti discovered the Self-Employed Women's Association, a path-breaking organization in Ahmedabad that works with poor women. It's a micro-lender. And with the help of that group, Vasanti got a bank loan and paid back her brothers. By the time Martha Nussbaum met Vasanti, several years later, she had paid back almost all of the microloan that she had been given. Nussbaum's philosophy has two important elements. First is that it is a categorical imperative that the vulnerable must be protected. And second, that we can help the vulnerable by building an environment that enhances a broad spectrum of capabilities. She's been credited with Amartya Sen as creating the capabilities theory. And among her top 10 of capabilities is, quote, having the ability to seek employment on an equal basis as others. And that's a system for global justice that she is recommending. So, for all these reasons, work is important, right? Work is important. Spiritually as well as practically, it's central to our existence. But, of course, there is a downside to work. There is certainly a downside to work. Erik Erikson, the psychoanalyst, psychotherapist, who was not quite a student of Freud, but followed in Freud's path. He studied at the Vienna Institute of Psychoanalysis, quoted from an interview with Sigmund Freud. Again, this has gendered language, and I don't like gendered language, and Freud, of course, is subject to criticism for that very reason. But I'd like you to think of all of us when you hear gendered language. Freud was once asked what he thought a normal person should be able to do well. The questioner probably expected a complicated and deep answer from Freud. But Freud simply said, lieben und arbeiten, to love and to work. It pays to ponder on this simple formula. It grows deeper as you think about it. For when Freud said love, he meant the generosity of intimacy. When he said love and work, he meant a general work productiveness, which would not preoccupy the individual to the extent that he might lose his right or capacity to be a sexual and loving being. Mari Ruti, a philosopher with a broad range of influences, wrote an exceptionally clear article on the subject. First, she mentioned Lauren Berland's idea of cruel optimism. Cruel optimism is the stubborn, irrational belief that working harder, quote, will eventually pay off and make us happy. The daughter, this is how she describes cruel optimism, the daughter of working-class parents who has watched her parents toil without reward for 2 decades might still place a great deal of faith in the ideals of hard work and social mobility, hoping against hope that the American dream will one day rescue her, even if it did not rescue her parents. Then Mari Ruti, from the University of Toronto, discussed Sarah Amen's happiness scripts. We work and work because we think more work will bring us the happiness we seek, and then when it doesn't, we are so invested in all the time and work we have spent to get this happiness that we double down. The more one works, the more one gives up, the more difficult it is to take a different direction. And then Ruti mentions the socialist, Freudian Marxist Herbert Marcuse. And Marcuse said that capitalism depends on what Freud called repression. We take impulses from the id, our genital desires, and transmute them into productive labor. And so capitalism works best the more repression there is. And Marcuse says, get to a point of surplus repression. That is, we repress ourselves more than we need to. We channel more of ourselves into our work than we need to. And then add on postmodern capitalism's consumer culture, where we are constantly told the new things we need, things we didn't know we needed yesterday until we were told we needed them today, and we are trapped in a world of work. The performance principle, work, is what Freud saw as the foundation of civilization, but the principle has run amok. And now we repress ourselves willingly and unconsciously, and worse, the performance principle is so ingrained in our psyches that now maybe we can never get out. But there is a way out. Let's go back to that quote from Freud, to work and to love. Those are the two things that humans should do. So how do we recapture the love side of the balance? There is another of Freud's works that I think shows the way. It is from Creative Writers and Daydreaming from 1908. And let me read it to you. I've excerpted it, and this one I have done gender-neutral language because I think it needs to be read in a gender-neutral language. As people grow up, they cease to play. As people grow up, they cease to play, right? We get old and we stop playing. And they seem to give up the yield of pleasure, which they gained from playing. But whoever understands, this is essential to Freud, by the way, whoever understands the human mind knows that hardly anything is harder for a person than to give up pleasure which the person has once experienced. When the child has grown up and after laboring for decades, i.e. when we're adults, they may one day find themselves in a mental situation which once more undoes the contrast between play and reality. As an adult, they can look back on the intense seriousness with which they once carried on their games in childhood, and with their childhood games, they can throw off the too heavy burden imposed on them by life. So the answer to too much work is simple. It's play. That is the answer to too much work. Mari Ruti made much the same case in her article. Her solution to surplus repression cited the post-Freudian Jacques Lacan, who may be the single most influential philosophical undercurrent operating today, Lacanian theory. And instead of play as the solution, Ruti offers desire, or jouissance. But I think these terms can be incorporated into Freud's broad definition of play. The answer to surplus repression, the personal revolution you have control over in your own life, is to make sure that you have enough time to play. It's that simple. And so I look out to my friends here and think of all the different ways that we play. Andrew and Katie play with their music, and Janice Pitsley with her artwork, and I see so many others around here and the way that they play. Karen Stuckey with her photography and her bird watching, Barbara with her photography and her meditation. We all find great ways to play, and what we do here on Sunday is also, we're playing together. That's what we're doing because we're not working. We are here to play together. Mary Lou Coy's regular seat was in, one of the last 3 rows next to the kitchen. It was remarkable that Mary Lou didn't miss a single Sunday. A lot of you know Mary Lou. Some of the newer members may not, but if you were here in the last 5 years, you met Mary Lou. I knew that one day a Sunday would come and Mary Lou wouldn't be here, and it did. And I asked Lori Perry where Mary Lou was, and she had been injured in a fall and wasn't doing well, and then she passed away within a week. And every Sunday, Mary Lou arrived early to set up snacks, tea, and coffee. She brewed it in the percolator that's in the back of the sanctuary. And I thought of this with Mary Lou. Our song that we'll be singing for the end is Blue Boat Home, and it likens humanity to shipmates on a universal sea. The earth being the ship, the blue boat. On a boat that is at sea, some of the seafarers will row their own weight. Some won't because they are too young or too old or injured, or even because they are selfish and lazy. They won't row their own oars. There are those who complain, who say that any person who cannot row his or her own weight should be punished, or worse, thrown overboard. Then there are those who sit next to their oarlock and quietly and consistently row more strokes than they are allotted, and with every small effort, they propel the ship forward. And that's what Mary Lou did in her service for our congregation. And that is also what labor does. It propels the blue boat forward. And when we have done our work, we go to the deck and watch the stars at night, or sing, or run, and we play. And that explains why on Labor Day we take a day off in honor of work, in honor of labor, not because labor is a bad thing, it is a good thing, an essential thing. But we take a day off to play, and so tomorrow, go out and play. Happy Labor Day.